There is a distinct biological reason why human beings fear the dark. It is an evolutionary leftover, a survival mechanism passed down from our ancient ancestors who huddled around small, dying fires while predators circled just beyond the tree line. We tell ourselves that we fear the dark because of what might be hiding inside it. But the true, deep psychological horror isn't the fear that you are alone in the dark. It is the fear that you aren't. For decades, humanity has pointed its massive radio telescopes toward the sky, searching for a whisper. We look up at the cold, silent vacuum of deep space, desperately hoping to hear a broadcast, a signal, a shred of data that proves our lonely little rock isn't the only cradle of life in the cosmos. We call it the Fermi paradox. If the universe is so infinitely vast, why is it so terrifyingly quiet? The answer is simple. The universe isn't quiet. It is keeping its voice down. My name is Arthur Pendleton. In October of 1997, NASA launched the Cassini-Huygens spacecraft. Its mission was to spend over a decade orbiting Saturn, studying the planet's majestic rings, its volatile atmosphere, and its mysterious icy moons. To the public, Cassini was a massive success, delivering breathtaking, high-definition photographs of the gas giant before its intentional, dramatic suicide plunge into Saturn's crushing atmosphere in September of 2017. The public believes the plunge was executed to protect Saturn's pristine moons from potential contamination by Earth microbes. That is the sanitized, official press release. I know the truth because I spent 24 years as a senior signal telemetry analyst at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. My desk was responsible for receiving, cleaning, and cataloging the raw electromagnetic data beamed back to Earth from Cassini's radio and plasma wave science instrument. Cassini didn't run out of fuel. It didn't experience a mechanical malfunction. We drove that multi-billion-dollar machine directly into the crushing, burning furnace of Saturn's core because we had no choice. We had to melt the instrument. We had to burn the antenna. We had to make sure the data stream was permanently severed because on January 14, 2005, as the Huygens probe detached from Cassini and descended through the thick, toxic orange smog of Saturn's largest moon, Titan, the sensors picked up a frequency that shouldn't exist. The following text is the unredacted transcript of the audio logs from that mission. Put on your headphones. Turn out the lights. Because the sky you look up at every night is a graveyard, and the things that killed it are finally starting to look back at us. According to the official logs, the Huygens probe took 2 hours and 27 minutes to drift down through Titan's frozen atmosphere. The landing was textbook. The telemetry confirmed that the probe had touched down safely on a solid plain of frozen methane slush. The instruments immediately began recording data, wind speeds, temperature, atmospheric composition. But 42 minutes after landing, the high-frequency radio relay between the surface probe and the orbiting Cassini spacecraft began to experience a bizarre pattern of phase distortion. At first, the engineering team thought the signal was being warped by the intense electrical storms in Titan's upper atmosphere. The data packets were returning corrupted, filled with a heavy, pulsating rhythm of digital noise. I was called in to run the telemetry through a series of audio isolation filters, hoping to strip away the planetary static and salvage the data. I sat alone in the sound-insulated basement lab at JPL, adjusting the frequency sliders on my console. The audio coming from Titan was a chaotic, freezing roar. It was the sound of liquid methane wind whipping across an alien desert at 300 miles per hour. A lonely, desolate, mechanical whistle. Then the wind died down. The ambient microphones on the probe recorded a sudden, absolute drop in atmospheric pressure. The wind stopped completely. On the audio feed, the only sound left was the tiny, rhythmic clicking of the probe's internal cooling fans. And then, a liquid sound entered the microphone. It was a wet, heavy, rhythmic sloshing. It didn't sound like wind. It sounded like waves crashing against a shore. But Titan's lakes are thousands of miles away from the landing site. The sound grew closer, louder, expanding through the lower frequencies until my desk began to vibrate. Squish, squelch, slide. Through my headphones, I heard the outer titanium shell of the Huygens probe begin to groan. A sharp, high-pitched screech of metal being subjected to sudden, intense physical compression. Something was wrapping itself around the machine. Something cold, something organic. Then came the voice. It didn't use the radio frequencies. It didn't transmit a digital signal. The entity was physically vibrating the metal frame of the probe itself, using the machine's chassis as a vocal cord to speak directly into the internal microphones. The voice was a shifting, fluid mosaic of frequencies. It sounded like thousands of radio stations playing at the exact same time, their voices overlapping, cutting each other off, creating a discordant, vibrating roar that made my ears bleed into the foam pads of my headphones. The voice spoke a highly distorted, archaic variant of ancient Aramaic. I had to run the recording through a specialized linguistic matrix to extract the words. The voice said, "The little metal eye has dropped from the ceiling. The garden is awake. We taste your skin on the metal. We are hungry for the home of the eye." The audio levels spiked so violently that the safety fuses in my console blew out with a sharp pop and a puff of acrid white smoke. I ripped the headphones off my ears, gasping for breath, the skin on my neck covered in a cold, prickling sweat. The project director immediately ordered the telemetry feed to be cut. They locked the laboratory doors and brought in security personnel. We were told that a line of static had caused an equipment malfunction. We were told to delete the logs, but you cannot delete a sound from your memory. 6 months later, The main Cassini spacecraft, still orbiting high above Saturn, pointed its high-gain radar antenna directly at the planet's dark side. The massive shadow cast by the gas giant across its icy rings. They were running a routine mapping scan of the ring structures. The radar data didn't return a map of ice and rock. The imagery data packet bypassed the main servers and dropped directly onto my secure console. The monitor flickered, stabilized, and rendered a three-dimensional topographic map of what was sitting inside Saturn's shadow. The rings weren't made of separate particles of ice. In that specific shadow, the rings had been woven together, fused into a singular, continent-sized biological lattice. The map showed a web of thick, pulsating fibrous tissue, miles wide, stretching across the ring plane like a massive spider web. And suspended in the center of that web, woven directly into the frozen rock, was a structure that made my stomach completely flip. It was an eye, but it wasn't a biological eye made of fluid and iris. It was a colossal, planet-sized void in the fabric of space itself. A swirling, violent vortex of black sludge and glowing, toxic green radiation that was slowly expanding, feeding on the gravitational pull of Saturn's moons. The radar showed that the icy rings were being pulled into the vortex, their matter being systematically converted into more of that wet, fibrous muscle tissue. As I watched the screen, the radar refresh line swept across the image one more time. The planet-sized void was moving. It wasn't orbiting Saturn. It was turning. The vortex was slowly pivoting its axis away from the gas giant, pointing its center directly at the radar array of the Cassini spacecraft, pointing directly at Earth. At that exact second, the main communication terminal in the JPL control room burst into life. Every screen in the facility flipped from their data readouts to a single, blinking line of text. The text didn't look like code. It was a digital translation of an acoustic wave. Through the facility's emergency alert speakers, a sound began to play. It wasn't static. It was the sound of a human throat screaming, a breathless, screeching wail of absolute agony. But the voice didn't belong to a stranger. It was my voice. The audio signal was a perfectly reconstructed loop of my own voice, screaming in terror, but it was pitched down, layered with the mechanical drone of Cassini's engines. The entity in the rings wasn't just observing us. It had intercepted our transmissions, analyzed our biology, and was broadcasting our own fear back across the solar system like a mockery. The overlapping voices of the entity spoke through the static once more. We know the trajectory of the signal. We can trace the wire back to the finger that clicked the switch. We are coming to see the home of the eye. The control room descended into complete, unmitigated panic. Engineers were screaming, pulling cables out of the walls, trying to sever the connection to the deep space network. The project director pushed past me, his face pale as ash, and and slammed his hand onto the emergency self-destruct command sequence for the Cassini spacecraft. We watched the telemetry screen in agonizing silence as the probe plummeted into the gas giant. 10,000 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers, 1,000 kilometers. The friction temperatures reached thousands of degrees. The aluminum shell melted. The high-gain antenna shattered. The signal flatlined into absolute silence. We burned our eye in the sky just to blind the thing that was looking at us. The official government documents say the mission was completed. They shut down the department, reassigned the staff, and forced us to sign absolute gag orders. They built new civilian space telescopes like the James Webb. But if you look closely at the operational schedules for those multi-billion-dollar instruments, you will notice a bizarre pattern. They never point them at Saturn. They never look at the rings. They have designated a massive, permanent exclusion zone around that coordinates of the solar system, claiming it causes light pollution to the sensors. I left the space agency that year. I live in a remote cabin now, deep in the mountains, far away from any technology, any radio towers, any internet connections that can carry a signal. I don't look up at the night sky anymore. I keep my thick, heavy curtains drawn tight from sunset to sunrise, because 2 weeks ago, the global satellite network experienced a minor, unexplained glitch. It lasted for only 4 seconds. To the world, it was just a temporary cellular drop, a moment where their phones lost connection. But I have an old shortwave radio receiver in my cabin, and during those 4 seconds, the static stopped. The speakers didn't emit a hum. They emitted a wet, heavy, rhythmic sloshing sound. Squish, squelch, slide. A massive weight dragging itself through cold mud. And then, my own voice whispered through the speaker grid, calling out my name from the dark void between the stars. Arthur, the whisper said, a cold, distorted rasp that made my blood instantly freeze. The metal eye is gone, but we found the wire. We are almost down the string. The universe is not empty. It is a hunting ground. And humanity has spent 70 years standing in the middle of the dark forest, waving a bright flashlight and screaming our coordinates into the trees. The flashlight is turned off now. The telescopes are silent, but the things in the dark have already seen the light, and they are already running toward us through the black.